Hello and welcome. I'm glad you could be with us tonight. We're talking about a topic that I think is vitally important for all families. We're talking about end-of-life decision-making and decision planning. I've learned from my guests that about 40% of Americans, adults, do now have some written instructions for their family, but that means that about 60% don't. And if you're in that group, I think you'll learn a lot. And if you've already done it, it's something that we need to redo regularly too, so you'll get some tips, I think, on that. My guest is wonderfully able to talk about this. She's written a book about it. Her name is Anne Elizabeth Denny. She is a consultant in healthcare in the technology information segment. You've worked in that field for about since 1995.
Correct.
Let them do the math.
Yes.
She also is a woman whose mother had Alzheimer's, and Anne had a long, prolonged saying goodbye period with her mother, which we'll hear more about that in connection to her mission really now. Well, welcome, Anne.
Thank you for having me.
So glad we can do this. You got interested in this topic in terms of writing the book because of your mother, Carol.
That's right.
Tell us a bit about her and what your family went through, what she went through.
Right. Well, my mom lived with Alzheimer's, and our family went through that journey for 20 years. And she was formally diagnosed at age 60, but the symptoms had really begun a couple of years before that. She passed away in May of 2012, and so it was about 20 years through that journey. And the difficulty with dementia is it's so insidious. There's no clear dividing line where you think, if we could get the decisions made before this date, we'll know that we've got exactly what Mom would want. It creeps in, and it's so hard to understand, is the person really capable to speak for themselves?
And some days she might be, and some days she wouldn't be, right?
Exactly right. And the key issue is that our family, like most families, did not have a plan. We hadn't talked about it, especially because Mom's symptoms began so young.
And wasn't she, from what I've heard, a very vital, healthy woman? I mean, someone that
she was in many ways
to be old.
She was in many ways. She had tuberculosis in her 30s, and so she did have some medical challenges along the way, but in other ways she was still quite robust. But the dementia was really creeping in and taking away Mom. You know, Mom wasn't Mom anymore. And our family, like most families, didn't always agree on what would be the best care for Mom. And that's where my passion for this comes from. My heart in this and my mission is really to help families be prepared instead of waiting for the crisis. Because in the emergency room, we are not clear thinkers, and family dynamics are just on steroids, right? And emotions are amplified, and decisions are required rapid fire. And so that's the worst time to have these conversations for the first time.
People are so frightened and sad and scared.
And panicked, right? And siblings go to war with one another because each is certain that they know what would be best for Mom or for Dad, because Mom never expressed her wishes.
Your mother ended up being in a long-term care group home.
She did for 11 and a half years.
Okay.
Yes.
And were there a lot of times during that period where you wondered, would Mom want this?
There were a few occasions when I felt that my mom was ready for heaven. Faith is the center part of my life, and it was very important to my mom, and she and I shared that, and I just felt like she was ready to be at peace. And that wasn't the case for everyone in our family.
I saw a quote somewhere in your writings that families can, and I thought the word was so strong, unravel sometimes when there is a healthcare crisis. And I thought that's such a true statement.
Because we all bring our own emotional needs to the equation, right? So adult children who may have some unresolved issues with their parent and desperately want more time with Dad, so do everything possible to keep Dad alive so that I get time to fix things with Dad, but that's not necessarily what Dad would want.
And there's such in our society, I think we all know this at one level, a denial of death.
Yes.
We all think and want at one level to live to be old. And
well, we not only deny it, but then we try to defy it, right? And one of the things that's happened in the last couple of decades, we've morphed from a rather paternalistic sort of healthcare system. You know, I think of Marcus Welby, MD, that dates me, but that sort of perspective, to a more technocratic healthcare delivery system, where the technology capabilities often drive the decisions. And the problem with that is that families sometimes forget to do what they should, because they're presented with all the possibilities of what could be done. We could try this treatment, we could try that surgery, we could try this medication. And sort of that desperation and in that panic mode, do everything possible is the default. And of course, the healthcare system, the hospital, the physicians don't want to let you die. They're at risk for liability, right? So they'd rather do everything possible. And if the family's disagreeing, then all the more reason for the doctor to do everything possible to save Mom or Dad.
And I do think there is a lot of responsibility that should fall on medical training, because doctors do, of course, want to help people live as long as they can. But at a certain point, they're not helpful perhaps to a lot of families either because of that bias. Well, a healthcare directive is something that we all need to do and to think about. And I'm guessing some of the 60% out there, many of us, might have trouble defining what is a healthcare directive.
Sure.
Is it the same as a living will? No, but tell us what it is in your definition.
Yes, a healthcare directive is a legal document, but technically you do not need an attorney to write one. And it has two components. It has healthcare instructions, which allow you to express the wishes for care that you do and do not want to receive. And many states still use the term living will, but most states now call it healthcare instructions to denote more broadly all of the care you do as well as what you do not want to receive. So healthcare instructions, and the other component is the healthcare power of attorney, which allows you to legally empower your decision makers. They are called healthcare agents. Although states use different terms, it goes by healthcare agent, healthcare proxy, healthcare representative, healthcare decision makers. There's a lot of terminology. I use healthcare agents in my writing and my teaching. So those together, those two parts together comprise what's called a healthcare directive, also called an advance directive. There's a lot of terms.
A lot of terms, but you really should have both of these pieces, shouldn't you?
You should. And there are many who would say that the most important is to have the healthcare power of attorney where you name your agents, so that you have the right people who can zealously advocate for your decisions. I agree with that, but I think it's as important to have the healthcare instructions so you can support those decision makers, so that you clearly express your wishes. And when I teach about this, I also say you need to give them a window into your heart and your spirit by sharing statements of values and beliefs, so that those making truly life and death decisions have the best foundation to decide based on what you would decide if you could.
So you're not only benefiting your care, but you're making it easier for your agent or agents.
Exactly, and you're giving comfort to your loved ones in the process. Your instructions can and should also include your needs for emotional and spiritual care, because you are more than a body or a disease. And so you can tell your loved ones the kinds of things that would really give you comfort, so they can walk through that journey with you.
We'll talk some about some of the specifics regarding choosing agents and so forth, but I want to give the audience, and you're then our teacher here, a true-false quiz.
Okay.
And this just kind of brings the topic, for me anyway, to kind of reality. First statement, your primary care doctor probably will not be taking care of you during the end of your life. True or false? And we'll turn to our expert.
That's true. Your primary care doctor probably will not. And that is because our healthcare delivery system has evolved where in most cases you will have a hospitalist who will be sort of managing your care, but you will also have multiple specialists in many cases. Dr. Atul Gawande, who is a Harvard physician and writes for the New York Times and New Yorker and has several books, says that on average, a patient will have 12 doctors in the final year of life. So that adds to the need to have a well-chosen healthcare agent who can navigate and communicate with multiple doctors.
I remember when my mother was at the end of her life and was in a teaching hospital, and I think she even had more doctors involved.
In a teaching hospital, I bet.
Because of all the residents and so forth.
Sure.
And it was very hard to know who to listen to, who to, because
right, and
her
each specialist,
regular doctor was rarely there.
Yes, and each specialist gets so narrow in their scope, right? And so the nephrologist is here today to talk to you about your kidney health, but then the cardiologist comes in, and then the radiologist, and all these ists. It's confusing.
It is very overwhelming. Second statement, Medicare does not cover long-term care except for the first 100 days in a nursing home. True or false?
You might have to help me with that one because I'm not as familiar with nursing home care.
Well, I do some consulting in nursing home, as you know, and that is true.
Okay.
But I think a lot of people think, oh, I've got Medicare, and that will
everything.
Tide me over,
right.
so to speak. 100 days goes very fast in a nursing home. So that is true. Next statement. 25% of Americans die suddenly, and so do not have a prolonged death as your mom did, Anne. This could be cardiac arrest or heart attack or car accident. 25%, is that true or false?
It's false because it's actually closer to 10%. And so that kind of goes back to our denial. We always sort of hope that we'll be the ones that just die suddenly in our sleep, right? Unexpectedly, and that's really pretty rare.
Yeah, 10% surprised me when I learned that. That is very, very small number. Next statement, after 85, 1 in 2 of us will have dementia. It's a startling statement.
And that is true.
True.
That is true. And another kind of correlated statement is that 1/3 of seniors will die with dementia. So fully 1/3 will not have the capacity mentally to make their own decisions.
And so this really is persuading information, isn't it?
It makes the case.
And just one more statistic, and I think this was a surprise to me too. The statement is 30% of people will survive and get back to normal after having CPR. True or false?
That's false, and I'll give you an array of different statistics to support that. For those who receive CPR outside of the hospital, between 6 to 30% will survive, so outside of a hospital.
6 to 30.
Yep. Those who are inpatient, it is less than 15% who will leave the hospital. And for those who have significant medical history and complex conditions, or the very elderly, it's between 2 to 5%. And so TV shows typically mislead us. We think everybody recovers from CPR. But really, for those who are admitted to the hospital, for those who have complex conditions, it's much lower than you think.
So again, this all fits into this important reason to get something in writing, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
I want to go back, as I said, to the healthcare agents. In your book, Anne, you recommended a person have more than one.
Yes.
One child might be abroad or sick herself or whatever. Do you think 3 would be too many? Do you prefer 2?
What I advise is that you have a primary agent, you have a secondary, and if you can, even have a backup to your backup. And some people don't have that luxury. They just don't have enough people in their circle that they feel they could really trust with those decisions. But that's optimal. Many times I would hear older adults say, well, my children will just agree on what's best for me. And I'm here to tell you, no, they probably won't.
Yes.
Again, they each bring their own emotional needs. So try to avoid consensus. Have one person who's chosen with the final decision authority. So certainly your kids could work together, but if they don't agree, have somebody who's chosen as the final decision maker.
So even if you are a secondary agent, and you disagree with the primary person would have the legal right to say, no, this is what I think we need to do.
Depends how you write your healthcare directive. The way mine is written is that I have a primary agent, it's my husband, and he will make the decisions. If he's unavailable, then my secondary becomes my agent. So I have them one at a time, but some people choose to say, I want my two children to collaborate,
group decision
right?
there.
I want the two of them because I don't want one to be chosen over the other. But I encourage you to set aside those emotions to have somebody have final authority, have a tiebreaker.
Okay, because that, I can imagine, even if they all are people, all being all three or two, are very close to you, they could at the end have trouble, coming to agreement.
Exactly. And then siblings not only are grieving the loss of a parent, but at the same time, it might become estranged from a sibling. So you lose your whole family in the process, which is such a travesty and can be avoided with proper planning.
There's, we've only got 10 minutes left. There's a really important differentiation, I think, that I want to have you talk to. A new form, rather new, called the POLST,
Yes.
P-O-L-S-T.
Yes.
And that's very important to have filled out for the doctor, isn't it?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yep, the POLST is for physician order for life-sustaining treatment. That's what the acronym is for. And the POLST is a clinical form. It's written by the doctors. It's as a doctor's order, which is different than a healthcare directive. A healthcare directive is not a doctor's order. A POLST becomes very, very helpful if somebody is really near the end of their life, if their horizon is maybe 6, 12, 18 months. So the death is imminent, and therefore putting their preferences in clinical terms that all clinical personnel can understand and follow is tremendously useful. I recommend that you put the POLST on the refrigerator, on the nightstand, keep a copy in the glove compartment, have it highly accessible so that EMTs can see it and follow the POLST. Now here's a really tricky difference. EMTs are not legally required to follow a healthcare directive.
That's what I thought was so interesting.
Yes, but they will follow a POLST because they're covered under the doctor's orders of a POLST. So I encourage you to speak with your physician about whether your health and your age in life, if it's an appropriate time to write a POLST. It's not for everybody, but it certainly can be a valuable tool.
So the POLST would be congruent with the healthcare directive.
Should be.
But just more specific, as you said, with medical terminology.
Yes, and it's more succinct because it's really meant for clinical eyes, so it's just check boxes. It doesn't really elaborate in a way where a healthcare directive can support the decision makers. One of the reasons that POLST has had some controversy, it grew up as a grassroots movement in the medical community, but technically the patient does not need to sign the POLST. So for instance, we never did this, but we could have, for my mom's care, gone to the physician and said, we know what mom would want, so we want you to write the POLST and sign it. So we could have done that on my mom's behalf. Well, that always raises then the possibility of nefarious motives where disgruntled adult child might approach doctor and say, I know my mom does not want to continue living this way, and maybe that's not the truth. So there's some controversy between the medical community and the legal community about the role of POLST. I think it can be very valuable in the right context and used judiciously.
But talk to your doctor about it.
Talk with your doctor.
If an EMT, emergency medical person, came in to your home and you had a POLST and you said, I do not want CPR, they would honor it.
Correct.
But if they came in, you did not have a post, but you had an advance directive, for one thing, they may not know where that was, and you may not have it accessible. But let's say they had it on the refrigerator also, or saw it there. They wouldn't have to follow that, would they?
And I want to be careful to say I'm not an attorney and I'm not a physician, so I'm very cautious about this. From everything that I've learned, they are not legally bound to follow the healthcare directive because they're not covered under doctor's orders in that situation.
Yeah,
I spoke just yesterday, and an EMT came up to me afterwards and said, make sure you tell people to have the documents available, because if they just say to the EMT, my mom does not want CPR, that's not good enough.
Well, there's a lot to learn about this. What are some of the goals about dying that we just have a few minutes left, but that you have that you're putting into you, or you have put into your advance directive?
Well, I do talk about the goals for my death. So one of my goals is I don't want to leave messes behind. I want to own the responsibility and use my time, my emotions, my resources to put my affairs in order. So I don't leave that on other people's shoulders.
It's a big gift.
It's a huge gift. And I think it's
gift.
part of your legacy to die well, however you define that, but to invest yourself in preparing yourself and your loved ones. I don't want to suffer. My family knows to advocate passionately for my palliative care so that I will be comfortable to the best of their abilities. And I try to live my life in a way where I am giving forgiveness and seeking forgiveness frequently and sharing words of love and acts of kindness, because I want to live ready. I want my relationship with God to be right. I want my relationships with my family to be right. I don't want to wait for deathbed reconciliation with people I cherish. So I try to think of death as a sort of final, beautiful gift. If you do it well, it can be.
And if you have that strong understanding and feeling as you do, what a gift to your kids too.
It is.
You know, because I think at one level we're all afraid of dying, for parts of our life at least. And it's a great gift if a parent can be reassuring.
It is, and you can teach them. Somebody, when I spoke yesterday, said to me that he had witnessed a magnificent death, a beautiful death. And I thought, what a lovely reflection to be able to remember somebody that way, as opposed to bitter family arguments, screaming and yelling at each other in the emergency room.
Right. That's a horrible contrast, isn't it?
That is.
You have, and it's something quite unique, I think, but we'll probably be seeing more of them. But you have an online course that you give people all kinds of information and options to think about.
Yes.
Are you finding that people are going to the online course in a way that reflects our modern time here in terms of using the computer?
I'm seeing an interesting mix. So I am also just now launching a live workshop. So there's sort of two different modalities. Some people prefer the comfort of their home, their own computer, a little bit at a time, because it's heavy work.
Right.
But other people prefer come for 3 hours on a Saturday morning and get it done. Right?
Sit with other people.
And sit with other people, come with your spouse, talk through it together. So I see it just depends on personality and what works for people.
Well, we're getting a cue that we need to give some resource info, and this is a perfect segue. If you want to learn more about Anne's workshops, her book, her online course, I have two websites for you, so jot these down. First, www.AnneElizabethDenny.com. And then secondly, healthcarechoicesfromtheheart.com. And both of these are, I've been working with them over the last few weeks. They're wonderfully accessible and
Thank you.
full of information. So I'd urge you to check those out. We have just a couple minutes left. We're going to close, Anne, with a beautiful song that you wrote. Would you just tell us what we're going to hear?
Sure. There was a season in my life where I did a lot of composing, and one of the songs that I wrote was about being the daughter of somebody with Alzheimer's and getting to the point where mom didn't recognize me anymore, and how hard that is as a daughter when your mom doesn't know she's your mom anymore. And so I wrote this song and had the privilege then of working with some local musicians to produce it. Sarah Renner has just a beautiful voice, and I asked her if she would sing it, and she did. And we turned it into a music video, which we then had as a gift to the Alzheimer's Association, and they used it for some of their work. So that's the song, and so you're going to share that.
So we will hear that song.
It's called Carol's Song,
in
named
honor
for my
of
mom.
your mother.
Yes.
It's just gorgeous, so thank you. We're going to use that under our credits. Well, thank you for being with us. I hope that you've had your interest up, and I know I have. I need to do more work in this area myself. So thank you so much for coming down.
Thank you. It was a delight.
And kind of getting us all thinking harder about this, something that we cannot avoid, and we'll feel better, I think, when we've done a thorough job.
You will have peace of mind, and your loved ones can have peace of mind when you do this work.
Yeah, it's win-win.
It is.
It's win-win. Well, thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Mary.
Great to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. I'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good week.
Through vacant hollow eyes, I wonder if you see me. Am I trapped inside the memories that your fragile mind erased? A flickering, fleeting smile brings back your face, reminds me of the woman who once raised me. Is her spirit still alive? Is your spirit still alive? Can your soul speak what your lips may not? And can your heart hear what your mind may not? Can you feel my presence? I'm here. I am here with you, beside you. Can my love sustain, remind you? You will always be my mother, and I'll always be your child. I close my eyes to pray that God's arms embrace and fold you with a tenderness that comforts you, brings you joy and peace each day. Can your spirit hear